Hi friends, this is Mandia on Astral Oracles, and I'm going to talk about channeling or discovering your genius. Genius is of course a Latin word, and originally it simply means the inborn spirit that a human being comes into the world with, and we all have it. And then in the Romantic era, it gradually perverts into meaning some sort of effervescent gift that unique, exceptional beings are born with, and that of course then paves the way for that cult of individuality where we begin to worship particular artists and creators, and we can say today, for instance, it has moved on to entrepreneurs. So if you, for instance, look around that strange cult surrounding a person like Elon Musk, this is essentially people projecting their own longing for a state of perfection that they can't reach out onto a person who seems to embody these things, and that can of course be very helpful, but it's also worth noting that of course the recognition of a person's genius or exceptionality is essentially something that's borrowed to them from everybody else. So if no one recognizes the talents of somebody, then well, then of course it isn't necessarily genius, it's just a person being weird. But if we look at the people who we would probably consider geniuses as without much discussion today, you'll find that they actually often follow a pattern where these people went highly unrecognized in their lifetimes. So a story that's worth returning to in that sense is that Van Gogh's brother was handing out his paintings for free at his funeral, and nobody really wanted any. And I'm sure that that would have been a very prudent business move, right? It would probably have been better than buying real estate in the Manhattan 200 years ago. Like few things have accelerated as much in value as Van Gogh's paintings, and of course they're not for sale anymore. But when one of them does come up for sale, the prices are exorbitant. Um, and you will find this with a lot of people. Herman Melville, who's it's a pretty uncontroversial statement that he's probably considered the best American fiction writer of all time. And a few years before his death, he had some success in his early career, and then a few years before his death, the New York Times were writing sort of there was a snarky article in the New York Times talking about, oh, that guy, he's still alive. Oh, he seems to be working down at some um, customs office at the docks, and like nobody cares about him anymore. And then at the centennial of his birthday, all of a sudden Moby Dick is discovered again. And if you look at Moby Dick with the eyes of the literary taste of the 1920s, it's an absolute masterpiece. If you look at it with the literary taste of the 1850s when it was written, it's kind of a mess in its composition. So that's also to say that often there is a type of time release ingrained in people expressing their innermost selves, which they don't get to be a part of, and of the recognition of, and that means that you can't really take the outward recognition of these things for as a marker of whether or not it's valuable or not. And instead, that marker is essentially coming from people's own heart and their sense of purpose in unfolding this. And of course, in some cases, it seems like, well, this is an inborn skill. I think it's fair to say that Michael Jackson was probably a fairly tormented individual, but of course, when he was singing or dancing, he could did that immediate effect of, okay, there's something very special and incredibly talented, almost otherworldly going on here that this person is bringing forward in his personal expression. And so there's often an element for most people in discovering this where they also sort of soldier on or push through these obstacles that the world presents to them in order to live out their gifts. And and I think it's probably important that it has nothing to do with popularity. So, for instance, an example that sometimes springs to mind for me is my best friend in the fifth grade was a guy who, as we put it in Danish, was probably not completely big through, which is a euphemism for saying that he was of subnormal intelligence. But when I think of the way he would interact with repairing his bicycle, attending to that, or minding his fish tank, there was just some sort of otherworldly passion that shone through him, and that was very beautiful to observe. And I really hope that he still has fish tanks and attending to his bicycles, or maybe it turned into cars, who knows. But I'm sure that you probably know people who like seem kind of hopeless, but once they get their hands on a lawnmower, you just sense that there's this deep intuitive intelligence moving through them, where okay, this person is, they're living out their will in this moment, and that is so beautiful to observe. And we all have that to some capacity in different degrees of our lives. There are places where we shine, and probably a very helpful way of finding these places is actually to look at what has been suppressed within you. That means these are usually the talents that have went unrecognized by your parents or your primary caregivers or your immediate circle. So it's something that seems again inborn, like it's not ingrained within you, or it's not something that you're indoctrinated into, but it's a passion you have. For some weird reason, you find yourself attracted to this thing to a degree where you can't let it go, because it really mesmerizes you. And of course, this is how I feel about the channeling. There's a lot of precursors in my life where I feel that that's feeding into this. I always loved explaining stuff. I could lose myself talking about abstract matters even before I discovered this gift. That was one of my favorite things. Um, but I also love dancing, which is certainly also a thing that was suppressed in my childhood. But when I began trance channeling, I realized that the channeling state was actually something that I had touched upon more in dancing than any other places in my life before. It just felt so incredibly good, and I think that's probably also a good place to start, like dancing, singing, some of these things that actually bring a lot of people a lot of immediate joy. And then the more you allow yourself to express this, the more refined it also becomes. That is, the more in tune it becomes with your um, own personal vision of this skill. And at the same time, it's something, as the Enlightenment philosopher Immanuel Kant said, that genius is something that operates within parameters um, that it doesn't know itself. Um, and I'm paraphrasing him here, and of course he was writing in German, but I think it's very helpful to know that there is some wind, divine wind, I would actually call it, that wants to move through you, and you find this place in, or you find the signature of this in the places where you lose track of time and space, and where you stop thinking about yourself. Often in modern spirituality, thought is made out to be this demonic quality, and you always want to reach the non-thinking state. And of course, it's very helpful, because most people, they think too much in this overactive, stimulated, caffeinated society that most of us find ourselves in. But essentially, it's not thinking that's the problem. It's thinking about yourself. It's this neurotic process of trying to adjust your image of yourself. And because these thoughts, they don't come from you, essentially, They are lent by society to you, and of course we could say the minor fractal of society is your immediate surroundings or your family life. And I think that's a helpful perspective. How I sometimes phrase it to understand it for myself is, and I don't know if this makes sense, but ego relates to culture in the same way that the Atman relates to the Brahman. And the Atman is the personal soul, which is identical. This is the basic tenet of classical Hinduism, with the cosmic oversoul, the totality of the all. And so it's expressed in the sentence Tatvamasi. But notice that culture generates sort of a specific field where the ego then tries to express itself as a minor fractal of that. And that's why it's always in opposition, because it's trying to ingrain codes, but the way it proves that these codes are working for it is by attracting attention from others, because it's not upheld by that divine wind, which actually has infinite meaning and potential and quality in itself. And I'm so often, I think a lot about the early Christians, and I try to understand what's up with religious people. Like, how do you have to perceive the world to be a person who's fine? I'll just go to Corinth and tell them what's up, and then I'll go to Spain and tell them what's up, and I'll travel the Mediterranean until the empire gets a hold of me, and then I'll insist on being crucified upside down because I really don't want to make myself equal with the Lord, which is, of course, in the case of Saint Paul and Saint Peter. But those are examples. But I just think it's very important to remember that a lot of the most influential people in human history in general have been people who have been marked out as weirdos and losers and and just general oddballs by their surrounding culture. And so consider, do you think Walt Disney had a lot of support in in drawing talking mice, in having a vision that this is what I want to bring to the world? It's talking animals with clothes on, and and then he actually managed to make himself a millionaire and make a lot of people happy and inspire a lot of people. And this is a complete, it's a process that reiterates itself on every pattern. So the thing that actually sets you apart will often be a thing that's sort of unrecognized by your immediate surroundings, and yet you can't seem to let it go. And the more you move into that, the greater emotional rewards, and which is a deep ineffable sense of fulfillment that touches you, and that I'm sure that many of you that brings you into this immediate state of expression. And of course, where a lot of people seem to both seek it and find it is, for instance, in the sexual act, because that's like a wordless space where you get to invest yourself fully in a situation, and which of course also has a very clear, let us say, emotional physiological reward that's built into our physiognomy, which is the release of orgasm, right? But know that as you build up these talents, it's something that you can cultivate to the state where there's almost a sense of orgasmic fulfillment by experience itself, and that's often a signature of, let us call it, spiritual progress. That you feel that your sense impressions, that what you are able to bring forward, they fulfill you, they touch you with something that's basically a release of benevolent energy. That's basically a sense of the superfluous creative bounty of being alive. And that's often what we strive at. And so with that long preliminary, it's simply because a lot of people have uh, well, come into contact with this stuff also because they resonate a lot with the channeling experience, is my sense. They resonate a lot with the energies coming through. And notice that, as I often repeat, we are all always channeling, but where we draw those energies and where we bring them into the world are very different. And so we will all have a special configuration where we feel this is very, very meaningful to me. And even if I can't live up it, and even if it isn't recognized by others, it's still something that I feel the need to do. And the more you can come into this place, and the more you can allow for that process to be the compass that you guide your life, um, that guides your life, and that you live your life by, the greater sense of joy, fulfillment, and let us say carelessness in the most positive sense of the word will actually move into your world and touch you. So I hope that's encouraging because I, of course, have the privilege of interacting with a lot of people's higher selves or spiritual selves in this process and in the work that I'm fortunate enough to do. And this means that I get that perfect vision of them, of something that's really, really wanting to come into the world, to allow itself to be seen and to be recognized by the individual who's seeking out this practice. And essentially, all I consider this work to be is giving people the permission slip to be themselves. And that's so wonderful, right? So if even if you're singing out of tune, you're giving people the permission to do the same. You're giving people the permission to express themselves by doing the same. And so know that when you are being your oddball self, doing things that people don't necessarily recognize, you are doing them the greatest favor in the world because you are allowing all of us to actually become what we really want to be. And I think that's perhaps the most beautiful thing we can aspire to. It's actually to allow ourselves to be our own loving selves fully. So with that talk, I wish you many blessings on your path, and I thank you for watching. Much love, guys.